You're very welcome to Legends of News, the podcast, of course, that gets the inside track on how and indeed why some of the most significant events of the last half a century and more unfolded from the journalists, producers and reporters who witnessed them at first hand, who in some cases, I guess at the time, didn't realise the significance of what was going on in front of them. And no, I can't think of anyone better qualified to fulfill that role than today's guest, who just in pure numbers, I think, is reported from something like 140 countries, interviewed, I don't know, dozens, scores, hundreds of world leaders, 200 or something like that. And of course, beneath those bald statistics lie this multitude of insights, perspectives, and good old-fashioned stories. So let's get some of them right now from the BBC's World Affairs editor and a long time ago, a colleague of mine. He is John Simpson. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Dermot. Nice to speak to you again.
It's really good to have you here. And John, I just want to kick off because, you know, throwing those numbers around, they're mind-boggling. Of course, they mean nothing, 140 countries doing the world leaders, but it leads me into, we do kind of like to start at the beginning. I'm an old-fashioned storyteller. What is your sense of place then with that amount of travel, those years outside the country? You know, where is John Simpson from? Where does John Simpson call home?
Well, now I call Oxford my home. I still work in London 4 days a week. So I'm a commuter, and I have a house in Oxford, a small house, with my wife and just about still my 19-year-old son, but he's at university and he's, you know, on his way in life. And so I sit here among my books, surrounded by dons, and I think I'm a bit of a failed academic, Dermot. I think, I don't know, I mean, you know, life takes you in funny directions, but that's what I wanted to be, was a don. And right down at the fag end of my life, at the age of 81, bingo, I'm back here in Oxford among the dons and the books.
So if we turn those numbers around, still with numbers, 81, turn that into 18. Is that, let's see what I did there. What were you, that was your aspiration then, was it, to complete your university course? Of course, you were at Oxford, Magdalen, wasn't it? And
no, sorry, I wasn't at Oxford, actually. No, it's all very confusing. No, I was at Cambridge. It wasn't Magdalen, you're right, but they've got a Magdalen here and a Magdalen there, and I was that one there. So this is foreign country to me, you know, this is the territory, really.
The opposition. But the idea then was, what, to pursue an academic career?
Well, that's what I would have liked, because that was all I knew, you know. All I saw was these clever old characters reading books and writing superb stuff. And I thought that was my view. I wasn't clever enough, Dermot. I didn't get a good enough degree. Nobody would have looked at me as an academic. And I've been doing quite a lot of student journalism, and I like writing. I like the business of, you know, putting experiences into words. And so I started applying for jobs, and I in those wonderful days, if you were a university graduate, you know, you almost had your pick of things. And I had, I think, 4 offers of employment, one of which was the BBC. And surprise, surprise, the BBC took infinitely longer than anybody else to reply. But I wanted to go to the BBC. So I hung out, and having to write letters to organisations I would have loved to have worked for, like the Sunday Times, saying, oh, actually, I don't think so, thank you, thinking, I hope those bastards at the BBC come up trumps. And for once, possibly the only time in my life, actually, they did come up trumps eventually.
Yes, I love the word you used there about the BBC. We'll get onto it a bit later, whether you might still apply that in places, of course, because it is, as we know, a multifaceted organisation. So where did you get your start, as they say, within the BBC? Of course, you got accepted by them. That did happen. Been there ever since. And what did you start as?
I started out as a junior sub-editor in the radio newsroom. I didn't realize at the time, but they thought that I was quite a catch. And it turned out that my dear director of studies at Cambridge, very lovely man, wrote the most glowing letter to the BBC, in which he said something like, I was expected to get a distinguished first. And I didn't know that, of course. I didn't know what he'd said. And nobody asked me at the board, did you get a first? Actually, I got a really crap 2-2. And but they thought they'd got this sort of gigantic brain, this fantastic, they just got me. But anyway, they've had me ever since. A bit late now to say, we got you on false pretenses. But I was, the original pig in a poke for the BBC, really.
You've rumbled yourself now. You're right, it's too late. And, you've done way too much. So, let's get quite quickly, because there's so much to discuss to the reporting, as I say, from all around the planet. But you didn't go straight into that, did you? You were political editor for a bit.
I was political. I did a number of jobs, actually, reporting jobs, but almost from the start. I joined in 1966, and in 1970, they had a big reshuffle of the BBC. I think they created Radio 4 and Radio 3 and out of what had happened before. And they put a lot of effort into new news programs. And I came up with an idea for a foreign news program at 7:00 in the evening on Radio 4. And they bought it, surprisingly, and I presented it. So right from the very start, I was involved in foreign news. And then the very next year, Northern Ireland blew. Well, in 1970, it was already well alight. And I went to Belfast and did a lot of reporting on the Troubles. And then in 1972, they made me the correspondent in Dublin, covering the whole of Ireland. I mean, I was only in Dublin so my family could live there in, what we thought was relative safety. I mean, it wasn't terribly safe, actually. And then, so right from the start, foreign news and reporting and being a correspondent, it all happened rather early on in my life, really.
Yeah. What were the roots of that? I mean, was there any kind of wanderlust in the family? I'm not, becoming a psychologist here, but did you travel a lot when you were bored up? What was your fascination with it?
Well, I got it off my dad. He was an extraordinary, very difficult character, had a very awful childhood, ran away to sea. My family was kind of decayed upper middle class. There's few things worse than having all those awful pretensions and none of the money to back it up. And we grew up in quite a working class area. I grew up in quite a working class area in South Norwood. In London. Now it's rather posh, actually, and houses cost 2 million each or something. But in those days, it really wasn't. And my dad, at the age of, I think, 15 or 16, ran away from his awful school and his pretty awful parents and joined the P&O, the Peninsula and Orient Line, as a steward. And I think he spent about 10 years traveling the world, all around the world, as you might imagine. And I think that sparked it off in me. I mean, my dad's stories about being in India and, what it was like in the Suez Canal at the height of summer, and what Australia was like, Japan, all these things really kind of worked away at me. And so I think it was quite natural, really, to look outside South Norwood and the areas that we lived in afterwards, because my dad did get a bit of money after a while, dear old boy. And to look abroad, really, for my kind of interest in life.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? A lot of people I speak to, how Northern Ireland, particularly at the beginning of a career, comes up. I mean, it also affected my career in the sense that while you were reporting from there, I was watching it because I was at school there. And, not just in terms of then what you went on to do later, and perhaps even more dangerous locations, there is just that physical danger. But, perhaps more interesting is, and I wonder if this is what, kind of really piqued your journalistic interest, is how things connect. Why is there conflict? Well, it seemed to me, and I'm sure it seemed to you then and indeed now, that between the Protestants and the Catholics, particularly the working classes, they had exactly the same economic problems. There was just this huge sectarian issue, which, you had to really delve deep into the culture and the history to understand. And even some of the people caught up in that conflict, particularly the young people, well, even they didn't understand it. They just did it. But, it just posed all these complex questions that I feel, from my point of view, and it is far, far less auspicious than yours, has informed my understanding of people, of processes, of politics. Was it there that then you started to think, right, the lessons I'm learning here as a reporter, I can apply more widely?
Absolutely. I mean, you put it in an absolute nutshell, Dermot. I mean, it was a kind of petri dish of world events, except it was all boiled down to a few dozen rough streets in Belfast and Derry, and I adored it, actually, because it was complicated. I've never been a great one for liking things because they're simple. I like the complexity. I loved knowing more about the history of Northern Ireland. I mean, going right back to the settlements under James I and the war under Elizabeth I. I got caught up in a kind of a sort of attack that wasn't really intended for me at all, or anybody that was with me, but was intended for the army, near Crossmaglen in Northern Ireland. And reading back over, so I found a book with I'm sorry, I'm losing my ability to speak here. Stories of different Elizabethan soldiers that they had to write back, like their official reports on what had happened. And bingo, I found one in just the right area, the exact same area, just outside Crossmaglen, where the road turned, where this English officer and his 20 men had been ambushed by, the sort of IRA of the day. That was, I think, in 1592. And, all those years later, I'd been through exactly that same experience. And that had, I mean, some people find that so depressing, the idea that, people should be just living through their own history. But I found it absolutely fascinating. And I love Northern Ireland, still go back there out of choice. I love Derry very, very, very much indeed. And Belfast, I mean, I'm going there quite soon again, and I love it, absolutely love it.
You lived in Ireland for a bit, didn't you? I mean, you
Yeah.
resided.
A long time, actually, on and off. I was based there as a correspondent for 3 years, 1972 to 75. And then when I got married a second time, my wife, who's South African, in fact, and I headed back to Dublin to live, and we've been back there. I had some harebrained idea that I could live a sort of semi-retired life in Dublin and just do some travelling from time to time for the BBC. All fine until they put the airfares up by a factor of 5 or something, and I couldn't. It was absurdly expensive, so we gave it up and came back to Oxford. But Ireland's been a long kind of line through my life, and I've got one of my best stories ever by having an Irish passport. I was able to go to Argentina at the end of the Falklands War, which was a most exciting, extraordinary, dangerous, horrible time. But a British passport wouldn't take you there, and fortunately, I was eligible for an Irish one.
Oh, so what? I mean, they obviously they weren't very keen on the British. This is what, 1982, post Falklands War, and you went in as an Irish person.
Yes, I went in there. It was absolutely typical of everything. I went in there with an American producer and I think a Jamaican cameraman. And we got in there, and I said I'd got this elaborate thing about how I was working for Irish television and so on. And I got in there, and directly we got to the hotel, the guy behind the counter said, yes, Mr. Simpson of the BBC, we've been expecting you. So I said, no, what gives you the idea of the BBC? No, Ireland, America, Jamaica, nothing. And he said, oh, well, that's strange, because the BBC rang up yesterday and asked if you had arrived yet and said you were working for them. That's the BBC for you, with one hand not knowing what the other is doing. Actually, it was all perfectly safe. I mean, we didn't have any problems. But
I'm sure we're going to hear lots more about some of the techniques that you've had to employ to get some of these amazing stories. But it seemed like you were coming off the road. I'm trying to remember when you were political editor. It was in the early 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you presented the news. I mean, like I used to do, just, hang around a studio and read auto cue.
No. Well, I'll tell you something, Dermot. If I ever thought that, and I hope I didn't, that all people that read the news do is just read other people's words off autocue. I really, really learned that wasn't the case when I presented the news. I wasn't all that good at it. The thing is, I was rather thrashing around. I had a big dispute with my boss, and so and then the job of political editor came up, and I thought I'd like that. I'd like to do it. Actually, I found British politics so bloody limited and small time. I missed the world by that stage. I'd traveled to loads and loads of countries, and I was starting to understand a bit about how the world worked, and then to come down and find the sort of local stuff in Britain was a bit depressing. And after a while, I thought that this chance to present the news came up. They rehashed the whole thing, and they had journalists to present the news instead of what we had, which was actors. Actually, they did a better job than the journalists, I think, certainly than me. And so I put my name forward for that, on the understanding that I would continue to be political editor and read the main news. Of course, absolutely insane idea, and I had to give that up almost immediately. And then I wasn't terribly good at reading the news, and why I got the boot is still unclear, whether it was just my own inadequacy or because it was during the time of the Falklands War. I did a report. I didn't read the news every night. I read it 2 nights a week, and John Humphreys read it 3 nights a week. And on one of John Humphreys' nights, I did a report on what the Argentines thought Britain would do if they invaded the Falklands. And it turned out to be a litany of mistakes that the Brits had made, misunderstandings that allowed the Argies to think that they wouldn't respond. And I did a piece about that, which was actually quite groundbreaking. But Margaret Thatcher, whom I knew quite well, and actually I have to say liked to a certain extent, she went ballistic about this. Now, whether she then rang the Director General of the BBC and said, get that so-and-so off the news, he denied it. I never, I think, asked her. But I don't know, who knows? Of course, it's rather more flattering to me to say I got the boot for doing some reporting the government didn't like, rather than I got the boot because I was just incompetent at the job.
We will never know. I've got a pretty firm view on which one it was. Let's let it hang there. John, on that note, though, about the parochial nature of domestic news, domestic politics, do you think that still kind of pertains? I mean, I'm not doing anyone down, but and it even flows from the Falklands and kind of post-Second World War events that we in this country still seem to have this mighty view of ourselves. Okay, a post-imperial power with huge amounts of clout. When we look at those world events that you still report on, wherever they may be, you usually get some kind of statement from senior politicians saying there must be dialogue, you must lay down your weapons, His Britannic Majesty's government demands that you do so. And you think, well, how does that go down? And, let's look at the recent India-Pakistan dispute. I mean, they were warned by Britain. I'm sure they didn't even notice it if they gave a damn at all.
Some places do. I think Pakistan noticed it quite strongly, and India, with its slightly different attitude towards Britain. I mean, there's a resentment in some parts of Indian politics against the idea that India should ever have been controlled by another country. Whereas in Pakistan, what Britain does and says has more kind of importance. It does in India too, actually. What I think it is, actually, Dermot, is that it's different types of influence and different types of importance. I don't think that the Foreign Office saying, you must stop this at once and lay down your arms now, we, the British, are telling you. I don't think people take much notice of that. But there are other aspects of Britain. Britain as an economic entity is still very important in the world. I mean, we seem to ourselves to be, down on our uppers, but it ain't true. Not if you compare us to most other countries. I hate to say it, but the BBC and British journalism in general, British television news, of which you've been such a magnificent exemplar over the years, this has a powerful effect. It right around the world. It creates the kind of atmosphere that makes people think, if the British are saying this, it must be true, it must be important. They may not like that, they may counter it, they may feel angrily that they have to counter it like the Chinese and Russians do. but it's because we count in that kind of way. There are ways in which we count and ways in which we don't count. And we're not very good, I think, as a nation in working out the difference between those two.
Yeah, but it's quite simple. I mean, when it comes to our neck of the woods, and particularly your neck of the woods, the broadcasting side of it, that voice, the British voices, in particular, the BBC World Service, just enormous so-called soft power. It's weakened to our detriment, isn't it? If funding disappears and things like that.
Oh, well, I mean, we're a third down on our income from where we were 8 years ago, I think. That means an awful lot of cuts. What I love is that the government, I mean, it was particularly trying the Conservatives, but clearly this present Starmer government is no great friend to the BBC. Good too. I don't want to be friendly with governments, but they, just the way in which we were cut back had the government's fingers on our windpipe, and then we have to cut back as a result, and then we get the blame for cutting back. It isn't only British politics, but that is particularly true in British politics. You wouldn't get that kind of thing. Well, you wouldn't anyway, but in the US, you wouldn't get it in France or in Germany. It's different. Things are different here. And I feel, but perhaps I shouldn't harp on about it, that our horizons in this country have got a lot narrower in the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, and that funding and conundrum really is catch-22, isn't it? John, I want to ask you, though, you talk so matter-of-factly about this huge body of reportage and journalism and academia, may I say, huge output book-wise. But it's come at a cost, a physical cost to you. You've put yourself in physical danger so many times. Is it true that I've seen said that you come close to death, and of course seen others die, but you come close to death personally around 10 times?
It is, yes. I had the only one of those 10 times that wasn't work related was I got very dehydrated and I played cricket on a very, very hot day, stupidly, and it did something horrible to my blood, and I got something called acidosis, which turns your blood into acid. I think probably most people thought my blood was acid from the start anyway, but and that wasn't work related. That was cricket, and I had a kedgeree on a Monday morning. Never eat anything to do with rice or eggs made up like that on a Monday morning, because the buggers have kept it in the fridge overnight. Since Friday's fish. And anyway, so that was me. I nearly copped it then, but I had a long time getting over this. 10 days, 12 days, being pumped with different blood from all over the place, and I worked it out. Yeah, how many times? And there were there'd been nine other.
John, I'm just amazed if it had come to that. So dodge the Taliban, dodge whatever happened in Libya, dodge Saddam, friendly fire, of course, from our allies, the Americans, and yet it was the kedgeree that got him in the end. I can see the obit.
Killer kedgeree, yes. No, well, I was rather glad to have survived, partly for that reason, so that I wouldn't sort of make people guffaw around the globe, But the others, I mean, that not just sort of a bomb goes off, in the road, down the road. It's not just that somebody's firing down the road. It's that those 9 occasions were times when I couldn't see how I'd survived. Really, really close. I mean, bullets in the clothes, a bomb that threw me over and had me coughing blood, but didn't quite kill me. You know, that kind of thing. And there have been quite a lot. Actually, I was just thinking when we were talking about Northern Ireland, this isn't one of the near-death experiences at all. But very early on, about my second day, I think in Derry, when I must have been 24 or something, I went into a pub. I thought, you know, that's what you do if you're in Ireland. And I sat there and I ordered a pint of something. And a man came up to me. Now, you may recognize this. And he said, "What's your name, friend?" And what I didn't know is when people call you friend, that you're in trouble. And he got a knife and he stuck it under that soft bit under your jaw. And he said, "I'd like to know your name, friend." So I said, well, I couldn't think of any other name, and I didn't know which name to. If I'd said Dermot Monaghan, which I should have, well, no, I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
You know, who knows? He might have then stabbed me, beat me up, thrown me out, stood me a drink. You know, so I thought, well, I'd just say John Simpson. He says, "Simpson? That's a Protestant name." So I said, well, it's my name. And he said, "Lucky for you, this is a Protestant pub." And then he took the knife away, and I felt bad. That was not a near-death experience. I don't think he'd have done anything to me, but it did teach me a lesson about tribes and what my tribe is, and if I have one, and how to avoid people that don't like your tribe, you know.
Mm. But after each of these incidents, well, you know, the near-death ones, the ones, let's say, involving bullets and bombs, didn't it make it harder, John, just to get back out next time, or did you just discount them? How do you deal with them?
Well, different things in different ways, really. I mean, talking helps an awful lot, Dermot. Talking about it, and to somebody who isn't just going to roll their eyes up and be bored. For instance, when we were bombed by the Americans in northern Iraq in 2003, the rest of my team, everybody, we were all injured in different ways, all had bits of shrapnel in us, all lost the hearing of one or other ear. And I had a big bit of shrapnel still there. And no hearing in this ear. And the others, understandably, after that experience, seeing, I think, 15, 16 people burned alive in front of us, including, well, actually, he wasn't burned alive, but one of the dead was our translator, a very sweet kid, for which I've always felt responsible. And they didn't want to stay, you know, understandably. So they left, went home. But the producer and I just decided we were going to hang on and go down to Baghdad, travel to Baghdad. Fall of Baghdad happened just as we arrived. And we talked about it incessantly, all the details. And as we drove, it took us, I think, 4 days to get to Baghdad. As we drove in, and I saw the sign that said, "Welcome to Baghdad," from other days. And I was just in another interminable thing about seeing the bodies. I had to identify the bodies and so on, the burned bodies. It wasn't very nice. And I was going on about this, I think, complaining about it or something. And the producer said to me, "Do you know what? I'm sick of talking about all this." And I thought, yeah, I am too, actually. And it was a therapy to talk about it and to talk to somebody that really knew what had happened and everything. And we worked it out that way. And in other ways, I mean, I remember once being in Afghanistan at a hanging, a group hanging, 3 guys murdered, awful men. I mean, they'd done disgusting things. But, you know, I'm not a great advocate for capital punishment. They screwed up the execution in each of the cases, and it was awful to watch. And I thought, as I saw this, I thought, I am going to be dreaming about this for the rest of my life. And that night, indeed, I did have an awful bad dream, somebody's face in my... But then the next day I had to write about it. In those days, I used to write a column for I think it was the Daily Sunday Telegraph, which was a newspaper in those days. And I wrote all about it. And the editor said, I want all the details. I put all the details down. I had to dictate it. In those days, that was 1994 or something. You still dictated copy over the line. And the lady that took it said, oh, you poor thing, fancy having to go through all that. I'm so sorry for you. And but it never affected me. I think because of writing about it, talking about it, these things, it gets it out of your system, Dermot.
Wow. Yeah. You're quite remarkable to hear you say that, John. I'm just wondering if now we could start to, I suppose, pull the threads together. I talked in my introduction there about perhaps not realizing at the time when you were reporting on events, you know, just the helter-skelter of events and getting them on the air or writing them wherever you've got to get them to in terms of output, not actually realizing the significance of them. And there's one, because we can only pick a few out of so much in your career, but there's one that I remember because it was kind of, you know, coming of age for me in terms of this awareness. 1979, the fall of the Shah of Iran, the return of Ayatollah Khomeini, who'd been in exile in France. You accompanied him. He'd been a long time in exile, but he was the leader across the borders, and he was returning to much acclaim. I mean, millions upon millions on the streets, as you're going to tell me, in Tehran, but accompanied by great hope around the world as well. That, you know, a dictator had fallen, and here was, yes, from a theocratic background, to say the least, as we now know, but, you know, perhaps some semblance, some potential for the blooming of a form of democracy. You know, I mean, the obvious question is what went wrong? What should we have learned from that?
Well, it's a very, very complex situation. I mean, now, you know, immediately afterwards, actually, I think a majority of people in Iran would have wanted the Shah back. Things got very bad very quickly in Iran, and people blowing things up on a wide scale, war with neighboring Iraq, people dying all the time, people being arrested, tortured in jail. They thought they'd had it bad under the Shah. Actually, it was a bit like the Russian Revolution. The Shah was pretty hopeless. His secret police, the Sadat, were nasty, but they weren't much cop, and they got a much more unpleasant regime, which is still there to my amazement. They kidded themselves, you see. I mean, I think everybody kidded themselves that things would be better. Things would be better in the way they wanted them to be. So the religious people in Iran thought that it was going to bring a religious kind of orthodoxy, which it did in many ways. And the more liberal-minded people thought somehow or another, I don't know why they should have, but that Khomeini would usher in an era of a greater liberalization. Of course, all completely wrong. You have to be so careful when you want things to know that you're wanting something that's actually likely to happen as opposed to something you would like to happen. I loved Iran. I still do. I'm banned from there. I haven't been allowed back since I got thrown out in 2009. Wonderful, wonderful country, wonderful people, thoughtful, lovely, generous, charming, funny people who deserve better than they've got. We knew, I mean, I did know, and we all knew at the time, there are some things you go through, Dermot, and you think this is going to be important, and you never hear about it again. I mean, for instance, the bombing of Belgrade in 1999 by NATO. I mean, I thought when I was there, the bombs were falling. I thought, God, this is going to be something people are going to be asking about in 50 years' time. Not so. People forgot.
And they hit the Chinese embassy, didn't they?
And they hit the Chinese embassy. The Chinese haven't forgotten that, and the Serbs haven't forgotten it. But we, who did the bombing, well, the Americans did the bombing of the embassy. They're like a kind of teenage hooligan. I mean, I think the West is often like that, and Britain is like that too. We do these awful things, commit these awful acts of violence around the world, and then forgive ourselves immediately and forget all about it, and not everybody else. But there are other things like the revolution in Iran. I mean, we knew, those of us on the Ayatollah's plane knew that this was history being made. And then sometimes, let me just veer off and say, you can see history being made, and what's more, the newspapers and the television take no notice of it. Well, not exactly no notice, but the other day you had Xi Jinping in Beijing. You had Putin, and you had
Kim
Jong-un. And standing side by side, this is the new world order. So you open the newspapers, you look at the newspapers, you turn on the television, it's all about how much tax Angela Rayner didn't pay. And we now, this is the most important thing in the world that's going to affect all of our lives for the next 10 years, 20 years. But somehow or another, Angela Rayner is the lead story. Well, it's a mad profession. That's all I can say.
Well, it is. I guess back to our point about, navel gazing and things like that. John, I'm going to ask you, I hope you don't think it's a flippant question, but I'm sure you've been asked it before. I think people would be interested to hear it. Of all the, autocrats, dictators, let's say anti-democrats that you've met, did any of them actually strike you as having personal charm? I mean, did you, think, leaving aside what you've done to your country, the people you've thrown in jail or whatever, you're actually quite a charming guy, and they really are. I think they all are men.
Yeah, there are people, and when you sit in front of them, even if you've got nasty questions, hard questions to ask, they're showing you a totally different face from the face they show their country. So, a man like Colonel Gaddafi, for instance, I mean, a complete head case, actually, a total nutter, but with great personal charm, rather weird. And I mean, he did awful, evil things. We discovered he wasn't just a nutter. He was a serial mass rapist and murderer. Saddam Hussein, perhaps more lives on his conscience than anybody else's since Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. But not nice, not friendly or anything like that, but dignified. I saw him executed, You get these different people, and then you get other ones completely, like Bashar al-Assad of Syria, who oversaw the deaths of hundreds of thousands, possibly, use of chemical weapons. I mean, a more evil outcome you couldn't believe. And yet, when I went to see him, he's a soft, wet character. He'd been an ophthalmologist in North London, hadn't wanted anything to do with the family business of, ruling people and killing them. And because his brother died, they forced him to come back, made him the dictator, except that, of course, they dictated to him what to do. I was quite clear about that. I mean, I had no doubt about that. And I asked him about it when I interviewed him. Imagine asking Saddam Hussein, are you in charge here, or does somebody tell you what to do? Oh, wouldn't really want to do that, would you? But Assad leans forward terribly, and no, I really am in charge. I assure you, and every word showing that more and more that he wasn't in charge. Dictators. They don't come as a sort of in a kind of package. You open a package and then you've got the identikit character. They're all so very, very different in their ways, and some of them loathsome, and some, Winston Churchill found Joseph Stalin very entertaining and amusing. It's all about the face that you're seeing at the time.
How much sympathy do you feel right now, John, for your longtime employer? I know you've got something of a symbiotic relationship with them, put it that way. The BBC, though, I mean, do you feel sympathy for the rock and the hard place that it is caught in when it comes to reporting on issues such as we've been discussing? Particularly, we look at the situation in the Middle East, and is it simply a case of damned if they do, damned if they don't, therefore they probably are getting something right?
Well, I'm not a great one for that argument, because I think it encourages laziness and cowardice. The less you say, the less you make clear, the less complaints you get. Well, the fewer complaints you get. Well, I mean, that can't be right. I'm in favour of a different type of BBC tradition, where you work out to the finest detail you can possibly do what's happening, and what who's telling the truth and who isn't, and who's telling partial truths and so on. Then you put your fingers in your ears and you just go with it, and it doesn't matter who complains afterwards, because you think, I got it right. I don't give a monkeys. If you don't like it, that's because you don't like what's really happened. It's not my job. I mean, I thank God nowadays I do a bit of reporting on Israel and Gaza and all the awful things that have happened, and I've had shoals of angry hate mail, threats, all sorts of stuff as a result. But it's not my day-to-day job, and it is a pretty awful job to have to report on those things, and very, very, very hard to get it right. And I've got sympathy, great sympathy for the BBC, because I love it, as well as being constantly angered by it and infuriated by it. But I do love it, and I like its principles, which are as you know. I mean, I'm not saying these are different from your previous employees. ITN, I've got the highest respect. Sky, you worked for Sky, didn't you? I've got great respect for all of those. I'm not saying this is something only the BBC does, but the BBC does it noisily and in everybody's face, and it gets the stuff back. And I sympathise very, very much with the problems of trying to just get that line between honesty and fakery, which is our daily business. And I don't have very much respect for the people that attack it for their own purposes in one way or another. Politicians in Britain, governments like Netanyahu's government, who benefits if the BBC can be attacked. I'm not kidding. The Chinese, the Russians who want to see the BBC dumbed down in one way or another. I lump them all in a kind of omnigatherum basket.
Omnigatherum is going to be my word of the day. Word of the week. I mean, and of course, all this reporting is even more difficult during the times of and the developing times of all the social media and all the disinformation and all the swirling, whirling noise out there. And that's just the one issue I wanted to end on. And I'm wondering, is this one of those stories that you dated a Czech spy? With it, I mean, John, just tell me this is somebody's made this up. You dated Czech spy who worked for the BBC in the 70s or 80s or something like that.
80s. Dating is perhaps, I mean, that's a very nice word, but I did have an affair with her. My marriage had broken up, and and she worked for the BBC. And at some stage, she was a Slovak, actually, and now, of course, they're different countries. But then it was a Czechoslovak section, and they got to her. I don't know that she did anything. I don't know that she was a spy. She was so straightforward in her belief that the communist government there was absolutely wrong, and she loved Britain. I say this in the past tense. I think she's still alive, but a year or 2 years ago, apparently, I've had no contact with her since the 80s, I think. But she was in a car crash, and I think she's either still unconscious or else has died. Poor girl. Yeah, that was that. But there was something else. It may actually be that got in the papers. Well, I wrote about it actually. When somebody, I think they opened all the spy archives in Prague, and it came out. But there was another. I did some stuff which I absolutely loved in Prague in the early 80s. In 83, I went there, and under cover of all sorts of agreements and everything, I managed to do interviews with all the top dissidents, including Václav Havel, the playwright who became president of Czechoslovakia and then the Czech Republic. Wonderful, wonderful man, personal friend of mine he became. And that was absolutely magnificent. We rubbed those horrible old dictatorial characters' nose in it, and it was lovely. But they set a honey trap on me. A Czech girl who started writing me these very sort of affectionate letters. And, when you're of a certain age, you kind of want to believe that they mean it. I kind of knew it wasn't true, but, you kind of think, oh, well, maybe I'm not so bad after all, And but then she sent me some photographs of herself, not fully clothed, but suggestive. And one of them, she's lying on a couch with not an awful lot of clothes on, but some. And she said, "I'm sorry that about this, but I took this photograph myself." And I thought there was something funny about this because it looked such a good photograph. And I went to see a photographer friend of mine, showed it to him, and he said, he went over it with a magnifying glass very carefully, and he said, well, if she took this herself, I'm not sure why there's a guy whose reflection you can see leaning over a camera in the corner. And of course, it was a honey trap. The idea was that I was to go meet her in Hungary. Hungary was more liberal in those days, and Westerners could get in easily, and East Bloc people could do that. And we were going to be anyway. I mean, so I was actually rather keen. But in the end, I did get nervous with this photograph, and I got on to the BBC, and they got on to MI5, and MI5 sent a bloke round, bloke with a stutter, I remember, and a very weird old suit, very shiny. And this is extraordinary. I wonder if you'd mind if I took copies of these and took them back to show the chaps back at MI5. So I said, no, you do. But he explained to me what would have happened. I'd have gone to Hungary. We'd have met up in a hotel, just as we're kind of, together. Her husband, or somebody saying he was her husband, would have come barging in, and there'd have been a fight. He'd have fallen down, hit his head, killed himself, blood everywhere. And the cops would come in, and then there'd be a guy standing at the back in plain clothes who said, "This is very serious, Mr. Simpson, and you understand the penalties, but maybe, if we can arrange something, things might be different." So I said to the MI5 guy, "Look, that's absurd. How do you know this?" And he said, "Well, I have to say it happened to one of your colleagues only 6 months ago." And the colleague was foolish enough to agree and to cover it up. I wouldn't have ever done that, I think. Anyway, that was all it was. After the fall of communism in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, I went round to see her. And she was had a job behind the desk at a reception desk at a hotel, big hotel. And I queued up, and I said to her, "Hello, Anna." And she looked up at me, and poor girl, she went absolutely bright red and ran off into the back room, and I heard the click of the lock there, so I never really saw her again.
Well, that is where we have to end it. What a great set of images, not the physical ones. We've ended there. I mean, it has been an absolute pleasure spending an hour in your company, John. Barely scratched the surface, but all I can say is long may your reporting juices flow. Thank you very much indeed, John.
Well, thank you, Dermot. I'm sorry, I know I talk too much. And I must please let me say how much I miss you from our airwaves. I don't mind if you were on ITN or Sky. I just want to see you again. Maybe, who knows?
Yeah, maybe one day. Yeah. Tell them at your employers there. They need the old grey beards a bit as well.
They do. Of course they do. But then I would say that even more than you.